Could energy companies have done more to support those consumers that are out of reach? What more could they have done? Yes, Ronnie.
Something that didn't rely on the post, so maybe a more pointed form of contact. Some of them, for the prepayment meters, which is my area, maybe a message on the meter if that was possible.
Yep. So they could actually get direct to people rather than relying on postal services, because if you're off grid, postal services are perhaps not the most reliable way of
It's the vulnerable communities. I spoke to someone yesterday frightened by letters because people ask her for money. She throws them away. I begged her to put them in a carrier bag for me, but and that's not unusual.
It's not unusual, indeed.
I wouldn't want to suggest it was easy to do that, but that's right to pick on the prepayment meter users, understand the digital kind of limitations of many kind of households and make it not by digital by default. And I'm not underestimating the challenges of the energy companies, because we have this, but call waiting times. You know, you've got to focus on the ability to be responsive
We'll
to
come
demands.
to that later on. Yeah. Thank you for that, Gillian. Yes,
I
fine.
think just it's important to make the distinction between customers or people that energy suppliers have a direct relationship with. So that is people on traditional prepayment meters where there were challenges with the EBSS voucher scheme the past winter. And then customers on narrow boats or in care homes where suppliers will not have a direct relationship. They're two very different cohorts and the solutions will be different.
Okay.
So that way you might also look at then the household support fund. So actually giving money to local authorities to help with delivery of household support fund to some of these groups, because obviously those funds are also stretched as local finances are.
Really good. So you're recommending that 440 million that the Treasury took back should be distributed to local authorities to give out to people in hardship?
You might be sort of stretching the boat a little bit.
We may be stretching
The LGA will be very happy with that suggestion.
Okay.
No, I think that might be a part of the solution.
A quick yes, no. I keep within the chair's 10 minutes allotted. Do you think that the energy companies sufficiently engage with consumers who are in non-standard accommodation? Do you think they try and identify who really is vulnerable? Do they work hard enough at this? Yes and no. Matthew?
It's a nuanced answer. I think, as Gillian said, a lot of the suppliers don't have relationships with people in non-standard accommodation because there isn't, E.ON isn't talking to somebody who lives in a care home because that care home resident pays somebody else. So I think it's, I think there isn't a natural relationship for a lot of consumers in non-standard accommodation.
Yeah, same as Matt. I would agree with that. It's different.
And in the wider kind of vulnerable groups, they absolutely don't do enough to engage with them.
No.
With those caveats, no.
Thank you very much, Chair. Back to you.
Exceptional, Mr. Gardner. You're definitely gold star material this morning. Mr. Gardner, sorry. Now, Mark Garney and Mr. Garney, you're next.
Thank you very much. Gillian, can I just
Thanks, Barry.
sort of come back to you on some of the first questions, which was looking at the number of people who are being affected by this. And you came up with a number of, I think, 129,000 people who are got crisis support, 45,000 people who were receiving fuel vouchers. What I'm just trying to sort of finish up on that question is just the extent of the problem. So if you add those two together, would they necessarily be the same group of people?
There is some overlap between the two. Obviously, if you are not on a prepayment meter, you would not need a fuel voucher, but you might need a food voucher.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful. So if you were to add it together, all the sort of the total number of Citizens Advice Bureau customers that came in one form or another, how many households do you think you would be contacted by? And I'm assuming each one of those is a household rather than an individual.
Yeah, no, they would be a household. Yeah. Can I come back to you on that number? Because I want to give you an accurate number.
Well, it's really helpful, but
Yeah.
also what I'd quite like to know is your penetration rate as well. So how many people? Because if you look at England and Wales, there are 24.8 million households in England and Wales, and what I'm trying to get to the bottom of is how extensive is this problem? And if it's it's 1 million households, then it's a very, very big problem. If it's 200,000, it's a huge problem for the individuals concerned, and we do need to help them. But it's just trying to get a sort of measure of where we are.
Citizens Advice operates across around 250 locations across England and Wales. We don't operate in Scotland. We have a partnership with the Trussell Trust where we refer people into their food banks. So the number of people who are getting food vouchers, that's where they would be going. They'd be going to a Trussell Trust food bank or in some cases another local food bank. In terms of the charitable support, that will vary because a lot of that funding came from the Household Support Fund, and not every local authority delivered that in the same way and worked with Citizens Advice to distribute that money. So there will be some variations because we basically could hand out what we could hand out. But I'm very happy to come back to the committee with some numbers about sort of what we felt the total was and where you think, just to give you a more rounded figure on that.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. And by the way, just to echo Barry's comments a bit earlier, I've worked very closely with your team in Kidderminster who do a fantastic job. And again, all of you, thank you for the work you're doing for us. Can I carry on with you? You did a survey on the rankings of energy companies in terms of rating sort of overall customer service, and Octopus came number one out of that with a not hugely impressive 3.65 out of 5. So Energy was rating 14th. That's the reason I mentioned this, because they're coming in a minute. Was 19th, 2.4. British Gas 13th at 2.5. Why is customer service so poor?
So I think we have been in a very challenging year for advice agencies and for energy suppliers in terms of the number of people who need help and support. So the energy suppliers can talk about the sort of surge in call volumes that they've seen. We absolutely have seen a surge in call volumes as an advice provider. I think that's one of the challenges, because one of the metrics we measure in our survey is call answering times. So when your call center is under stress, your call answering time is not as effective as it should be. So one of the things we really want suppliers to do this winter is make sure they've got enough advisors trained up and ready to answer those phone calls, because we know some of the other challenges, they obviously have a lot of people who are in dire financial situations. They're probably needing to spend more time on the phone with them. And again, that will sort of feed into sort of people's perceptions of whether or not they're getting a good service, particularly too if the supplier is unable to help them, because the challenge is they just don't have enough money to pay their bills. So it can feed into a sort of concern about the quality of customer service, which is sort of driven by wider problems.
The key point you said is people don't have enough money to pay their bills, plural. And this is an interesting point. So you've got quite a lot of competing. So if you are, Octopus or someone, and you're trying to get some money off or have a conversation with somebody, that person you're having a conversation with may have seen his or her interest rates go up on the mortgage by 5-fold, from 1% to 5% if they've had to redo this, or they could see their landlord is increasing rent. There's all sorts of a number of different things, and then you add to that, the cost of food going up. How do they work with other creditors of those households? Because at the end of the day, if it gets ugly, presumably you've got Octopus and or any other supplier could be competing against, NatWest or Nationwide Building Society or anybody else. How does that work when you get to this?
So suppliers have a responsibility to agree sustainable payment arrangements with any customers of theirs that are in debt. And in a lot of cases, particularly at this point in time, because of the state of people's finances, people are not in a position to start repaying debt because they are struggling to afford their ongoing consumption. So that is the challenge suppliers have. In terms of what suppliers do with providing wider debt support, that's largely a commercial decision for that supplier, whether or not they want to work with a range of partners to be able to provide wider debt support for their customers. Some do. I think it's not consistent enough, because the real challenge we've got with people is people are struggling across the piece. The energy bill is a very visible and live problem that many people have, but as you've alluded to, a lot of people are behind on rents, are struggling with higher mortgage rates and food prices, and they need wider support. It's why we have called for targeted price support this winter aimed at low-income households, because for those households that money would make the difference between being able to keep the lights on, bathe the kids, and pay some of their bills.
Yeah, does anybody else have any sort of comments? Yes.
On the point about the energy firms and what they're doing, I mean, obviously the ratings look at how easy it is to contact an energy firm, which, you know, suggests, ratings you read out suggest it's not particularly easy to contact an energy firm. That's one measure. But also I think energy firms need to be judged on how successful those contacts are. If you're passed between 3 or 4 different people just to get an answer to your question, not only is that difficult for you, but it's going to take up time, potentially, especially if you're working with an advisor. There's a waste of time for Ronnie and her team in terms of when they're trying to get through to people and resolve problems. And there's also a question about empathy. Do people actually really understand the situation that the people who are calling in are in? And I think that it'd be good to see a measure of success for energy firms based on those 3 areas, so contactees, contact success and contact empathy, rather than just whether or not you can get through on an AI chatbot.
Out of interest, have you, obviously quite a sort of hot topic at the moment is ULEZ. Citizens Advice, or indeed anybody else, has anybody come to any of you about suddenly being whacked by this extra, you know, potentially £250 a month on the extra ULEZ charge?
Not something that has appeared in our data
It's
yet.
not a big thing.
Oh, thank goodness.
No, fair enough.
On the
I was going to say that's something that's going to come up, I think, and in the form of a future thing, because it's only just arrived.
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, but it's yeah, okay. I mean, it is what it is. It's a big political.
If I could just come back to the point
Adam,
about kind of industry standards in relation to the cost of living crisis that we have. I think if I was to pick 3 areas, it would be waiting times, because often that we know that people who come to us gave it a go with the energy companies, but it's a moment of anxiety. They don't really want to make the call. So if you can't get through, then you step back, and that opportunity to engage with a customer in dire circumstances who may be struggling with their debt repayment is gone, or gone for a period of time, and that gives a message to the supplier. So waiting time is important. For us, we wait on the phone to energy suppliers for clients as well. We figured out that for each of our suppliers, the call waiting times, we could have dealt with another client. Each advisor could have done with another client that day, and that's difficult to swallow. The other areas, though, is there is a responsibility, a supply license responsibility in 2 particular areas. One is to treat consumers in vulnerable circumstances with respect and empathy and to understand their situation. I think that's variable across the market and sometimes within companies. And the other, which has been mentioned at all, is debt repayments. If there's a fundamental challenge of customer service that comes out of this crisis, it's setting debt repayment levels at rates that just that push it as hard as you can, rather than understand what the household is able to repay. That's at the crux of it, and it feeds into the debt mountain that we've got. So it actually helps to be much clearer about what a household can afford, because you're just building up problems for yourself as a supplier and for the customer.
So just because we've got about 1 minute before Angus gets angry. Angrier. So just really about Ofgem, and Gillian, when I address this to you, but anybody else wants to leave and let me know. Has Ofgem got its priorities right in addressing customer protection? And what would you hope to see in Ofgem's new set of consumer standards?
So I think we were disappointed at how long Ofgem took to sort of grasp the prepayment meter crisis that emerged this winter. I think since then, they have taken the right actions. There's been there is still the temporary ban in force. There's new protections that are going into the license quite imminently that will really strengthen protections in that space. And it will now be a lot clearer about where prepayment isn't suitable for certain households. And I think the problem we saw last winter is that different suppliers were operating to different standards, and that meant that prepayment meters were being force-fitted on households where they never should have gone in the first place because of the risk of harm to those households. So I think Ofgem can take action and can take action swiftly. And we are hopeful that we, in terms of sort of the support people receive from their suppliers, will be in a better state this winter, particularly around things like additional support credit, which is what suppliers are now required to give to customers who are self-disconnecting from their prepayment meter. The process around that should be better and more straightforward for people.
All right, fantastic. Angus.
Thank you. I'm going to indulge Lloyd Russell Moyle for a minute because he's not on this panel, but he's in the second panel quite well represented. So you've got a minute, Mr. Russell Moyle.
You mentioned phone call waiting times. Should there be a minimum period of wait that Ofgem sets?
Maximum or minimum?
Sorry, a maximum amount of time. So yes, a maximum amount of time that someone has to wait to speak to a person. Should that be set in the standards?
Well, I think probably not. I mean, having a prescriptive measure that companies kind of can fail against is one thing. I just think you just need to monitor it. You know, it's one of those situations where are they doing the best endeavours? Have they kind of
They should have to report on what the average
I
wait
think it's
times
one of,
are.
well, yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things where Ofgem should just say, is that an appropriate level of time, and pick out suppliers who are obviously failing against
What
that
happens
mark.
then if a supplier does fail? If they have an hour wait, you've reported it, what's the conclusion?
There's two measures, aren't there? One is that it won't be a fine because that's kind of tied up in the supply licence conditions, but there are reputational measures that can be taken by Ofgem to make sure that if you're the bottom of the pack, it's not comfortable, and there's ways of driving that performance up. The other thing we'd want Ofgem to do is to separate out satisfaction scores for vulnerable households, possibly using the priority service register, and you could measure call waiting times against that cohort as well.
Matthew wants to put in this one, sorry.
So for our client group, phone calls aren't to be all and end all. It's the ability to speak to your energy supplier. Most fuel bank clients, they prefer to talk online or via WhatsApp. It's the ability to contact rather than necessarily the ability to have a phone call with somebody.
To get a response from a human. So what you're saying is a response from a human needs to come in a certain period of time.
Yeah.
When people select their supplier,
Briefly.
does anyone look at all those stats, or does everyone just look at the bill price? And so therefore, are any of those stats useful at all in actually driving the market?
I think they can be useful. They need to
How?
be more prominent. They need to
How?
be more prominent.
How?
You need to be collecting. You need to be collecting the right data. And part of the challenges with supplier ratings is collecting comparable data.
But how does it drive the market? Because I don't know anyone that looks at that data when they're
As
choosing.
a normal person, not as an advisor, every time I listen to the radio, I hear Octopus boasting. So I think that makes a difference, and people have said that when we say, if you considered switching, they do say, oh, Octopus. So
It works if you're the best.
it works if you're the best. And I'd also like to ask for us to have priority access to some of the energy firms so that we can not spend less time with people, see more people with the time.
Yeah.
So that if we had a priority support route.
That's a very good recommendation.
That brings me to my question.
I'm just laying you on there. You take the floor. You have 12
We're
minutes, 10
about
minutes.
to have these energy companies coming in, and I've got the first question to them, and so I want you guys to be telling me what you think we should be asking the energy companies to do differently. But before I get that, so just more on that, just Gillian, picking up on what you've all said so far, I get identify those most at risk, target them early if we can, get info up to them on help available, debt repayment issue, waiting times on phones. But go back to those 45,000 emergency fuel vouchers. I'm assuming that money came from government via the warm homes. I can't remember the money that went to local authorities, effectively. Correct? Who paid for those vouchers?
So for the fuel vouchers, that's through our partnership with the Fuel Bank Foundation. So Matt will be able to provide a breakdown of where they get their donations from.
Come from government money?
Some comes from government.
Some comes from government. Okay. So is one of the things you need us to make sure is that the money that came from government that could go through organisations like yourselves for the groups that inevitably we won't be able to get because they're so individual, that still flows? Yeah?
That would be helpful because
Okay.
it certainly helped last winter in allowing us to provide support to people who...
So making sure that the organisations, what I'd call you grassroots charities, have access to be able to give support to those who just fall through. Okay?
Yeah, so Fuel Bank last year spent about £10 million on providing emergency top-ups for people. We had grant funding from the Scottish Government and the Welsh Government, which allowed us to deliver a more robust service in Scotland and Wales. But there was no money from the UK government, and so we relied on corporate donations and public donations to fund our English
Were
services.
you not getting money from what's been given to county councils?
In dribs and drabs. Not a great deal, to be honest. It was largely corporate donations and £1 million of public donations.
Gillian, but you were getting money that came from County
So
councils?
some of our local
Some of them.
citizens' advice were able to provide additional emergency charity support for people through the household support
Through
fund.
the household support
That would be
fund.
separate from the Fuel Bank
Okay.
Foundation.
Would you
Voucher.
like to say that you think the household support fund should continue?
I think the household support fund provided useful support. I think if I had a priority for this winter, it would be targeted support through the energy bill, such as a sort of warm home discount, an expanded warm home discount, an increased warm
Do we
home
still
discount.
need to have a safety net for those that may not work for?
I think it's helpful. I think there were a lot of challenges with how the household support fund was distributed because each local authority did something slightly different. It worked very well in some locations, it worked less well in
Right.
others.
Good. So, what do we need these energy companies to do? Okay, some of them have made rocking huge profits at a time when people have just been facing horror. What do we need them to do different, and how do we get that to happen? Ronnie?
I need a third-party support phone line so I can talk to them
That's
when
a
I have
really good
someone
one.
with me or someone on the telephone.
A hotline for
Hotline,
local,
yes.
We have that for don't tell people.
But you don't want us to send them to you.
No.
We also need better grant systems. So as you're aware, some of the companies offer grants for people who've got into debt.
When you mean better,
It needs to be more across the board. Can you force them to do it?
we can make a recommendation. Give me some examples of how it.
Yep, so for example, British Gas, their fund is only open to people on prepayment meters. So people who've got bills with British Gas they've got behind on, they haven't got access to a grant fund for that. So it's potluck on who your supplier is and what grant is
It's a way of forcing
available.
people onto prepayment meters because you can only access the grant.
Yes, you could look at it that way, yes. And it is very unfortunate, I feel, when someone ends up on a prepayment meter.
I've got a few, although I'm going to preface it by saying there's a limit to what the suppliers can do, and this crisis is such a scale that it's government that needs to step in and provide the financial support. But they've got to get better at debt management, about proper levels of debt repayment. They've got to get on the front foot and identifying vulnerabilities and how they can work with them to give them. One of the things, picking up on Ronnie's point about the prepayment meters, it's for God's sake, let's get this Victorian ironmongery of these legacy prepayment meters out of people's homes and get the smart prepay in order that companies can be more responsive, more supportive, understand consumption patterns so they can understand who's actually in jeopardy rather than just not. Yeah. It is obscene that we still have these archaic bits of ironmongery on people's walls and making people traipse down to their shops to charge it. That is an abomination in this energy market, and it makes people who are at the worst situation and struggling, it makes them much worse, and it makes it so much more difficult for energy companies that want to provide them with the support. That's just got to get up the...
Okay, good point.
And to Adam's point, those old-fashioned prepayment meters caused the issue with EBSS.
Okay, so I was about to ask, how did this happen? How did this whole prepayment thing,
In terms of the wider scandal as well, or
the scandal happen?
I mean,
and why are we so slow to,
Well, let's also look at the fact that the government had an opportunity last night to ban the forced transfer of households onto prepayment meters, and it failed to take the amendments to the energy bill that would have done that. That now means that forced transfer onto prepayment meters is going to restart as soon as Ofgem and the energy firms say it is fine to do it. And we're not convinced that the protections that Ofgem are proposing go far enough to help protect those customers who should not be on a prepayment meter, and certainly not on a traditional prepayment meter. So one thing the energy firms could do is continue to have the voluntary ban on prepayment meters until the government actually does ban them for forced transfer. Obviously, prepayment meters, if people have opted into them, are obviously fine. But as Ronnie says, is there a sort of a soft pressure that's being applied by energy firms to get people to move them onto those processes? The other thing I'd say to energy firms is they've obviously, as you mentioned, they've made the supplier arms of these energy firms have done incredibly well, and some of that has been because of the decisions that Ofgem have made. So, for instance, the wholesale cost adjustment that has added 41 quid to every person's bills this year, that was allowed to energy firms to compensate them for losses that they say they made during the run-up to the Ukraine war. Well, British Gas hasn't posted a loss in its retail arm in over 5 years. So why does it need compensating for losses that didn't actually happen? Then there's the COVID true-up allowance, which again was supposed to help energy firms recover costs of bad debt. But bad debt is covered by the standing charges. So if you're on a standard credit tariff, about 6% of your bill is basically there to cover bad debt. So it seems that the energy firms are making a lot of money out of claiming for the same thing more than once. And at the end of the day, it's the government that has paid this money because the government had the energy price guarantee. So it was paying for any energy cost over and above that guarantee. So it's the taxpayer, it's the Chancellor who's been paying for that and been paying for those profits. So I'd want them to look at how they use those profits and the profits that they're forecast to make over the next year, which Warm This Winter campaign estimates are around 2 billion over the next 12 months, how they can use those to help people most in need, especially, for example, those who are in debt. You know, British Gas could probably have wiped out most energy debt for its customers and still made profit.
There's moral hazard, though, there, if you tell people you're going to wipe out everybody's debt, though, isn't there? So the whole moral hazard issue of, you know...
Yeah, so that's why I think the help to repay scheme is a...
But I like this, so you think in some cases the system is allowing the energy companies to charge twice for the same issue, effectively?
That's what it looks like on the surface. I'd want to hear the answers from the energy firms and for Ofgem.
What else do you think that they should be doing?
So things change. I think as I've got older, I've realised, you know, what was okay for me 3 months ago isn't. And so we talk about prepayment, making sure it's safe and practical at the point you install a prepayment meter. It's really important to keep checking that things are okay. A £10 repayment plan per week may have been okay last year, but then I might have lost my job, I might have had more kids, my situation has changed, and that always making sure that it works for a household is really important, not just checking at the point of installation, but continuing to reassure yourself as a supplier that
that's why the smarter meters...
Smart would help enable that, yeah.
Yeah, because it's instant data as opposed to data that may be a month or many months old to understand what's going on in that household and whether or not they can still afford to pay for
and
their
then
energy.
To act upon it when...
Yeah.
Generally bring prices down, is what you're saying.
We've got to be realistic. The scale of this challenge, yes, that would be great. I think suppliers could do work on the help to repay scheme. It'd be much better if government came in. But we've got to be kind of honest. Despite the huge support that government put in, you know, the universal provision, the crisis is worse this winter than it was last winter because of all the things that we've described, and it is of such a scale for households in such peril that government needs to find ways of providing financial support off people's bills as a priority this winter. Don't leave it to the last minute. Learn the lessons of what went wrong as well as what went right with the energy bill support scheme and commit to it. The other thing that suppliers could do if government allow them to do, maybe we'll come on to this, so I'll shut up if we are, is, for heaven's sake, government promised to have a consultation on a social tariff, a more enduring level of support, but I sense that we are. Sorry, shut up.
Sorry, I'm going to take in Mark Garner's brief questioning to a question that Adam wants to ask.
Just frequently, Adam, you come with actually a very sensible idea, which is the putting in a smart prepayment meter to get rid of the ironmongery. How many ironmongery prepayment meters are in existence at the moment, and have you got any idea how much it would cost?
And Matt would have a better idea about how many there are.
Let me come back to you with some proper figures, but anecdotally, 85% of people who we see still have a traditional old-fashioned Victorian style meter on the wall.
There's no additional cost. There are existing smart meters.
Oh, yeah,
This is just speeding up and accelerating it for the most vulnerable, the thing that should be the gateway to lots of net zero, lots of great...
Basically, there's quite a link between the prepayment meters and the people you're seeing. It's basically, there's almost a rotating door.
So 99% of people we see are prepayment metered.
Thank you, Mark Tennyson.
Thank you. Just before we do, it was a nice segue into social tariffs, which I was going to ask about, but I just want to stay on that subject for a second. It is there as an option, is it, for people, though, in the same way that other people get harassed to fit smart meters? Is it being offered by suppliers and just not being taken up?
If you're putting someone on a prepayment meter, you have to put a smart meter in.
But those are existing, so if you've got an existing credit meter but not smart, you are harassed until you give in and have a smart meter fitted. Is that not the case for existing prepayment customers?
I don't think it's the case that we've got sufficient focus. But there's two things about a smart meter. One, it's a piece of technology that goes in and it works, or it doesn't work. But it's the level of support and the tariff that you put around it which is important. So it's probably not enough to say, we'll just put a smart meter in, problems are solved, because of course that's not
It
true.
gives you that data, like you said before, it gives you the consumption data to a
It is
half-hourly.
immeasurably better. I know that people have anxieties about smart meters for one reason. It is immeasurably a better tool to support vulnerable households or households whose life circumstances
That is something
will
you
change.
sell when you're speaking to people.
If anyone asks us, I would say
Think
you are
well some
so
of
much
those.
better off having a smart meter than any other.
I do want to talk about social tariffs, so I'm conscious of time. So I'm going to go from left to right very quickly on, would the introduction of a social tariff be the answer to some or all of the problems for fuel-poor households? Start there, yeah.
So I come back at those right
Just a
and left.
very, just a very brief
Yeah,
yes or no on that answer, then I'll come back in more detail.
yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yes, and there's lots of different options as well that the government could consider.
Yes.
Yes.
Right, okay. So then, to go into some of the detail then, where should subsidised rates be focused, Matthew, and should they be subsidised by government, or should this be on suppliers?
So I think the level of support to really make a difference. If you added it, if it was via suppliers, it would be added to energy bills, which are creating other problems. So it needs to come through taxation. It needs to be focused on people who have a low income or a high level of energy consumption, either due to thermal efficiency of property or their energy consumption needs.
And we're doing a lot on efficiency measures. Eco4, I know we were late getting it out of the doors, but hundreds of millions of pounds through companies.
Yeah.
I don't feel that's being taken up sufficiently. There's probably a bit more we can do. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think in fairness, when people are maybe in crisis, it's really hard to have a conversation about Eco4 when they're panicking about, can they keep the lights on tonight? How do they wash the kids' clothes? And I think it's yes, Eco4 might be the right solution, but what's that bridging solution which kind of keeps people warm until the proper measure goes in? And that's
But some of these things can be fitted in a matter of weeks from application, solar panels, and I've got a number of constituents who are having measures fitted that will deliver benefits within 8 to 12 weeks of application. I just don't feel like we're perhaps doing enough for the suppliers or government to advertise, or even, you guys are concentrating on the emergency on the day, but we need to be having those conversations about, let's fix this for next time you land in front of me.
And I think we're probably all really being lovely people. I guess what we're trying to do is stop people come back through our doors again.
Yeah.
So it's our desire as well to stop people coming repeatedly to get help.
Gillian, government subsidy and who it should be focused on?
So if we do think we need to introduce some form of social tariff targeted price support. We did a big piece of work with Social Market Foundation and Public First, looking at this, collaborating with a whole range of organizations. We think it needs to be something that varies depending on the household income and the energy efficiency of their home. So some households on very low incomes that live in very energy efficient homes will need more money than a household that is on a low income but lives in a more efficient home. So it needs to vary based on the household circumstances. The challenge that we always come back to is the data matching question, which is why we need to be making progress on this, because we can't unlock any of the benefits that this would deliver to people unless we've got better data matching. We've got a decent system for people who are on means-tested benefits, but we also know there are a number of low-income households who are not in receipt of benefits and do need support with their energy bills. The other advantages of data matching is that it opens up access to programs like Eco4, which you may well hear from suppliers that one of the challenges they have is finding people who might be eligible and finding people who need that support. So if you've got a better system for data matching, channeling support to people becomes much easier.
In previous schemes we were spending £1 to find, for every £1 we could get out the door, I think.
The cost of searching for eligible people has been very high with previous schemes, and we need to crack that because we want the money to go as far as it can. The other challenge, the other issue too, is that it needs to be taxpayer funded. If we want to deliver meaningful support to people, we cannot socialise it through energy bills because the costs of that will be too significant for many other households. It could push other households into fuel poverty. So it needs to be taxpayer funded if we really want this to work and be a sustainable support system for people in the coming years.
Yeah, so I think obviously we support kind of that sort of reform. I think that the main options are, as sort of been outlined, or a kind of an energy for all idea where you kind of give everyone a basic amount of energy. But I think what we need to look at is actually these things are probably going to be more in the long term, and that's why it was disappointing that the government didn't do its consultation on the social tariff, so we could have had this discussion with the government. But what we need to also look at is what we can do this winter. So under the energy price guarantee, the legislation that exists at the moment, the government can alter the unit cost and the standing charge it costs for any particular group of customers. It is already doing this with prepayment meter customers to equalise the costs per unit that they're paying. What we could do is extend that into a kind of social tariff almost by the back door to get that into people's homes and onto people's bills this winter by altering the energy price guarantee. The department, civil servants made an admission to one of Adam's colleagues earlier this week that this is possible. They can do it. They can target groups of people as long as they know who they are, which means that, yeah, we're coming back to energy firms looking at, are they in debt to their energy firm? Are they on the priority services register? Are those the people who can quite easily be identified and could be in receipt of a sort of social tariff?
Our frontline crisis navigators, people only come in when they're in a crisis. If we had we do refer them to local energy support firms. We refer them for fuel bank vouchers. So we ask every single person, if they've got high gas and electric, do you also want someone to come into your house and look at reducing your costs? But they are at the point of crisis when they reach us, and I think that's the problem. We need to reach them beforehand.
On social tariff scope and who should fund it, have you any thoughts on?
Whoever's going to be the most generous. But we should add an extra question to the social. When you sign up for the social tariff, you should also be GDPR'd so you can go and get your energy saving measures done.
It's a quid pro quo. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's not a silver bullet, but it's an absolutely essential part. It's a fundamental that the greatest amount of regulatory protection should be afforded to those people who are most vulnerable in greatest jeopardy, and that includes price protection. Yes, it should. It needs to be funded by government. There are progressive ways of doing it. You can look at oil and gas levies and think about how you can hypothecate some of that. In terms of scope, it will need to be broader, Gillian's point, than simply means-tested benefits, because there's people with health conditions and life circumstances in which you want to pull it around. My key thing, though, is, and I'm not one that says this because I love the Cabinet Office protocols on consultative processes, but it's difficult, you know, and you'll have the next panel and they'll have ideas about what it should look like. It is difficult and contested.
What percentage of energy sold, I'm sorry, Mark, just what percentage of energy sold are we talking about that could be covered under a social tariff?
You could be as generous or as tight as you want, and this is the point.
What would you say would cover the acute needs that you're dealing with at the moment, the sort of people we've been talking about this morning?
If you look at the kind of historic energy prices, they are double what they were in winter 2020-21. So can you bring it down to that level as a starting point?
If the energy companies are producing, let's say, 5 gigawatts that's going into people's houses in a city, I mean, what sort of percentage of that do you think needs to be social tariff priced? And I'm not saying you've got the answer, but I just figure I don't think we know this generally, and we should be driving to find that out. Sorry, Mark, this is your area.
I mean, I don't think you can answer that. I think Simon's point is well made. Getting back to pre-crisis kind of levels, because at that levels we were just about coping. We were finding ways forward for people. Is probably
the key question is for who.
Yes,
is what we're trying to get, and that identifies the percentage of the market that.
And that's why, again, it's unusual, but that's why I think the consultation process isn't just a little bit of that. We've all got ideas about what the social tariff should look like, and so will the next panel. Who it should look. But unless you have a consultation process, the difficult trade-offs, the winners and losers, the progressive ways of paying, they're difficult. You've got to thrash them out and understand them.
The government came today and said we're going to extend the Warms Home Grant for winter. Who should we extend it to? What would be your answer?
Well, the limitations of the current Warm Home discount is about means-tested benefits. They took it away from certain groups with disabilities and medical conditions, get it back to them, understand other health circumstances that you may not get from data matching. You look at payment types as well as a good proxy for some of it. There's lots of groups that you want, but the hard truth, which I recognise, is a line will be drawn, and there'll be winners and there'll be losers, and there'll be grey areas, and you need to understand and explore. This is a methodical process government needs to do to identify what should be an enduring part of the regulatory structure for the market, and I just cannot understand why they seem to have resiled from that commitment to consult.
Really conscious of time, and I know Angus wants to move on. I was going to ask about standing charges and whether people understood them and where green levies potentially should be. So if you've got anything you want to submit in writing to the committee on that, that might be helpful. So,
thank you very much, Chair. Vicky, you said you had a small question directed to one person. Do you still have that?
Just probably for Gillian on behalf of the others, should the energy companies be putting some funding into helping you resource more advisors to the people that you
good question.
So the issue of energy advice funding is probably a whole select committee of its own. Very happy to send her some information.
It's a sort of thing. You'll obviously need more man and woman power next winter.
I think there is a need for more support in general to the advice community. Whether or not that should come from energy suppliers. Yeah.
They do, through the Warm Home Discount Industry Initiative levels and through donations. The big thing is the architecture, the advice structure is under stress.
Yeah.
And it's such a fundamental strategic element of the protection of those vulnerable households. Government should be thinking about the mechanisms to ensure we've got something that's fit for purpose, covers kind of all needs and all
You're going to need more advisors.
And is future-proofed for the challenges that we're going to be facing in the coming years.
Good, thank you.
Okay, final point, just for finishing this panel, we have to finish it now, but if we can find out what percentage of customers might be in a social tariff at some point in the future, if you can write in with your estimates of what that could be. A final point I just wanted to make was from last night we had an event in this room actually, and Adam Scorer was on it, and he said just for wider committee consumption that there's no way to net zero unless it goes through the homes of the poor or the low paying, and that's just something we can bear in mind for another day. Panel, can I thank you all very much, Matthew, Gillian, Simon, Ronnie and Adam. I wished we had longer, but such are the constraints of life in Parliament that we don't, but you've landed a lot of good points there, and I will now ask the energy suppliers to come up next. You're welcome to remain in the room and to keep the debate going and write in with anything you may feel, make notes, etc. Nice, Louise. Thank you for the swift turnover there, and welcome to Energy Suppliers. Again, a big panel. Again, you might find us being fast and abrupt, and apologies beforehand for that. Can I ask you all to introduce yourselves in the same manner? Name, rank and serial number, please.
I am the Managing Director of EDF Customers.
Rachel Fletcher, I'm the Regulation Director for Octopus Energy.
Thank you.
Chris Norbury, Chief Executive for E.ON UK.
So much.
Chris O'Shea, I'm Chief Executive for Centrica.
Thank you.
Simon Oscroft, co-founder of So Energy.
Excellent. Just before I kick off with, there's going to be a big area of that's coming up with a number of MPs wanting to get in this, but we had a point in the last panel. Simon Francis asked about the voluntary ban on prepayment meters. Do you think energy companies should keep that voluntary ban, yes or no, starting with Philippe?
No.
No, they shouldn't, okay.
We need to install responsibly and smart prepay only.
I agree with Rachel, we need to focus on smart prepayment meters and install those responsibly.
I think we have to balance the effort between allowing people to run up debt they can't repay and making sure we treat customers respectfully.
With a consistent framework.
Prepayment meters could be coming back, and the ban could be, the voluntary ban could be gone. Vicky Ford.
A lot of you listened to the previous panel, and that was horrifying. 4,700 deaths, dangerous coping mechanisms, people not washing their children's clothes, not using their ovens, risking their lives at barbecues. And in the meantime, a lot of you have been making an awful lot of money. Nine times profit increase. Chris, how do you sleep at night?
So our profits increased in British Gas this year, as you say, quite substantially. The vast majority of that is a recovery of past costs. And there's some comments in the previous panel about companies claiming twice for costs under different lines. That's simply not true. So the cost of bad debt does not come through the standing charge. The vast majority comes through the unit rate. It's right that and these were costs that were incurred not prior to the invasion of Ukraine, but after that. So we saw substantial costs coming through in the price cap. Most customers were on the price cap last year. We saw substantial costs coming through. And unfortunately, Ofgem were unable to change the price cap to match the cost recovery with the cost. So we saw material costs in 2022.
Sorry, stop. People are dying. People are being driven to situations to kill themselves last winter because of the crisis, one-off crisis that happened for the first time that winter because of Ukraine and others. And we think it may happen again, even worse. And yet your company thinks it's okay that you've made record profits and you're keeping them. Or am I wrong?
So firstly, I would say we've committed to put in 10% of British Gas Energy's profits voluntarily over and above what's required under licence conditions to help customers. Again, there was a statement made in the previous panel that was only for prepayment meters. That's just incorrect. So the 50 million that we put in last year, 10 million went to prepayment customers, 25 million went to any type of customer for British Gas, and 15 million went to small businesses, because small businesses are suffering as well. Now, last year the government had the energy price guarantee in place. That limited the price cap to about £2,500. That's not materially different to where it is just now. That took out the effect of the invasion of Ukraine. What we're missing is the energy prices more than doubled from the long-run average prior to the invasion of Ukraine. They're now back down to the level before the invasion of Ukraine, but they are twice the long-run average, so energy is far less affordable for other people. What we're facing right now, and energy is part of a crisis, which is there are a substantial number of people in the UK that cannot afford to live with dignity, whether it's rent, whether it's mortgage, whether it's food, whether it's energy. Now, energy companies are permitted to make 2% margin. That's half the margin that supermarkets make. That's a lot less than other regulated businesses. We are part of a bigger issue.
The organisations we had before made a number of different recommendations of things that energy companies could be doing right now, 30 degrees, but in 3 months' time it's not going to be 30 degrees. Getting rid of old repayment meters, identifying the most vulnerable, really targeting in these really difficult groups, looking at how you have better debt repayment schedules that actually don't frighten people. Do you guys all take it and say, yeah, we've heard, we're going to go away from this, and right now go back to our offices and think about how we deliver on each of those, hotline for them to get through to your customer services to sort out these vulnerable people? Do you agree? So let's go right to left.
Thank you, Vicky, for your question. I think we are already doing most of those things. In EDF, we are investing this year 200 million in order to help vulnerable customers.
You're doing 200 million and he's done, I think he said 25 plus 10. Yeah, sorry, thank you.
Yeah, just maybe to describe, because there are further things that we are doing beyond what has been described by the previous panel. We are not only waiting for customers to call, but we are calling customers preemptively. Last year, we had a campaign of more than 100,000 customers that we proactively contacted. The way to contact those customers is effectively to leverage the data that we collect through the prepayment, through the pay-as-you-go.
So you've heard what they've said, you think you're doing it. Rachel?
We're straining every sinew, including absorbing wholesale prices and making that business choice to keep our prices down for everyone, because fundamentally that's the most direct way to support customers through a cost of living crisis. And that's why up until now Octopus Energy has not posted a profit as a business choice. We are working incredibly hard. We see double the number of customers coming to us, needing double the amount of time, because, as has been eloquently explained, mental health crises, suicide threats. We are training our customer support teams to deal with that. But we also have a huge package of support, financial support for those struggling to pay. We will continue to look for new ways to support those customers, because it is a growing crisis. And I think we've had a lot of really helpful ideas already today that we'll take away.
I've got more questions, so really briefly, do you take what they said?
I think we do. I think we're doing many of the things that that the charities outlined this morning. In addition to that, what we will be doing this winter is we expect to spend about £80 million in the 6 months of this winter supporting the customers who need it most. That will be through 4 things. We will be providing a rebate on the energy bill to...
You can put that in writing.
So we've absolutely increased our customer care contact. We're doubling our debt prevention teams. We're working with charities more so than ever before.
Getting rid of the old repayment meters, yes or no?
But the fundamental point is it's an affordability issue that's bigger than any of those numbers, and that requires proper government support in a way that's well in excess of any of the numbers that we've spoken about before.
Can I answer on prepayment meters, because this is somewhere where you can really help us, because prepayment meters unfortunately just now are not mandated. Smart meters, they're not mandated. So we talked about smart prepayment. It's a choice for customers. We can't force a customer to take it. I completely agree with Adam that if we could get all of the dumb prepayment meters out and have smart prepayment meters in, it would be great. But we can't force customers.
Have you contacted all your customers to offer them one?
Yes. Now we've got 50% take-up rate so far.
And at this stage, out of respect for other members, thank you very much for that. It was a very good contribution there.
I'm not sure, but Chair, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I really got to the point.
If there's time, I'll try and take you back to
the moral issue.
Lloyd moral.
It's vital.
I don't understand why you are not able to just pass on cheaper prices to customers and not make profits on the production of energy. Tell me in layman's terms why you can't do that.
The licence condition, clause 19B of our licence prohibits us from subsidising energy retail with energy production profits. We're not.
When I said to Ofcom, their response was they didn't understand why they couldn't do that. So someone is either not understanding the rules or not telling me the truth.
It's part of the licence condition that we've got, but it's also a general thing.
So if you were to take your profits from the production side of the business and reduce your bills and directly subsidise, the government would come down and shut you down.
So 2 things.
What would be the punishment?
So firstly, it would be a breach of licence conditions. What the punishment is for that is down to Ofgem. Secondly, it would be anti-competitive. But the bigger issue is that...
Is the problem then we have vertical segregation in the market? Would it be better to just have a proper integrated system where the producers sell directly to the customers and then you can give us the discount that you actually should be? Let's get rid of these middlemen, these people who are, who half of them went bust anyway, and just buy directly from you, buy from the producers.
So there are different models in the market, and there are different models that you can have in the market. We are an integrated energy company. We produce a lot of the gas and electricity we sell, but not all of it. So we also have to import. We have a contract. We import the largest amount of gas from Norway. We spend about £70 billion over 5 years bringing that in. So I don't think there's any company which has more production than it has in retail, but that's a fundamental change in the market. However, we've also got to recognise there's a question about the level of profits that should be made, but there can't be a question about whether profits should be made, because if we simply say that all profits used in producing gas and electricity should be used to subsidise customers, then there will be no investment in that and we'll never get to net
zero.
zero.
You said you had 2% profits you were allowed. Was that on the retail business?
That's on the retail side,
yes.
2%.
But on the production business, on the energy production business, what percentage profits did you make there?
75% of our profits in those businesses goes to government in the form of taxation, following the changes. No, it's simply a fact.
Sorry, Chair, if I may. Only since they've introduced the windfall tax. Before that, it was the lowest in the world at 38%. Yes. So come on, just be a bit more open.
Hold on. Is that a data fact that you recognise?
No, it was, so North Sea was 40%. The electricity production was at 25%.
Okay. Before tax, what profit are you making?
We made profit last year before tax of £750 million in our nuclear production.
In percentage for production.
I need to write to the committee. I don't have that number.
Because in an ideal world, I don't want government doing a windfall tax. I want you passing on the savings to the consumer. I still don't understand. If we go back to government and get reassurances that you will not be punished for cross-subsidisation, would you do it?
Good question.
It's a difficult question because I think that what that would then mean is we would have, probably what that would force, I think, is that companies would divest themselves of the production assets, because you have companies that only produce, and they would have a different profit level. And you would have companies, if they were expected to subsidise retail from production.
So you would voluntarily choose to spin off some of your companies so that you wouldn't have to do that?
No.
You wouldn't want to offer You wouldn't want to offer consumers a cheaper price.
I think that's a misrepresentation. What I'm saying is you would create an incentive for companies to do that, and I'm not sure there are always unintended consequences of very quick solutions.
Is there not an incentive for companies who have production then to sell cheap energy to people? They would then dominate the market, and we would get rid of the middlemen from the market. Wouldn't that be great?
History shows us that companies that dominate a market are not received favourably. So I think we have to have proper competition. The question is, how do you get the right competition, and how do you get the right level of bills? But the reality here is that energy is a part of the cost of living crisis. Now, there was talk about a social tariff, which we might come on to, but this is not simply an issue that the companies here can solve. This is an issue that goes beyond that. This is an issue that requires cooperation between non-government organisations, between government, between energy retailers. It
requires cooperation, but you need to play your part. And what I'm struggling to work out is what your part is, what haircut you are making. When there are crises in other parts of the world, when there was a debt crisis in Greece, whatever, everyone made a haircut. What haircut? How are you worse off than you were before this crisis? I don't want you to be better off. I don't want you to be marginally less better off than you would have been if there wasn't a windfall tax. How are you worse off now? Because the consumers on the ground, their day-to-day lives are worse off now than they were before the crisis, but your lives are better off than they were before the crisis. How is that fair?
We've been profiting because of the crisis.
Mr. Norbury.
E.ON doesn't generate energy in the UK for sale on the wholesale market. We are a supply and customer solutions business only. Our margin in the UK is, for the whole of the UK business, our profit margin is 3.7%. To your point, we have lost money in our residential customers business for 4 out of the last 5 years, including last year. And as I mentioned earlier, this year, yes, we have returned to profitability, and this year we will be spending around £80 million this winter, in the 6 months of this winter, supporting those customers who need it most, delivering targeted support to low-income families by way of a rebate on the energy bill, by way of debt forgiveness for those customers who are in debt to us. We will be putting in, as part of that £80 million, we will be making additional funds available for distribution through some of the charity partners that we talked to earlier. The funds for distribution to the charity partners for customers who we cannot reach. That's what we'll be doing this winter.
I mean, I might ask these in the later block, but you've outlined some nice things. Simon's outlined some nice things that you're going to do. Philippe's the same. But they're all different. It's all a patchwork. If I am a customer in crisis coming to an advice centre, I've got about 101 different schemes. Why don't you coordinate yourselves and have one decent scheme for everyone to be able to apply for? What's wrong with doing that?
Can I jump in here? I mean, I think for us at Octopus, it's really important we can help our customers directly as soon as they come to us, and without passing them to a central scheme or we don't even pass them around our own organisation, to a point that was made earlier. So I think it's really important that we are not making life harder for customers by creating new schemes. The point that we all have the opportunity to absorb costs and keep prices down for customers, I think is one that is really well made, and one that we in Octopus are committed to doing, pricing below the price cap for all of our loyal customers, making the choice to take negative or lower margins, even those that are allowed by Ofgem. I think that's important to restore trust in this market, as well as having pots of money available to help those that are in severe debt.
I'm sorry, if we have more time, I'll come back to this area, but Mark Carney, you promised time just now.
So I'd like to go on a sort of slightly different angle on all of this sort of stuff. 4 of you are private companies. Obviously, Chris, you're publicly listed. Philippe, yours is a state-owned enterprise. Chris, can I use you because you've got a share price which reflects what's going on? So you've increased your profit by 900%, which, if you're an investor, that's good news. Your share price has gone from 65 pence to 156 today. What's happened to your price-earnings ratio?
So our profits have increased actually by 50% in the first half because we're a group. So you've got the number you quote for British Gas Energy. Our share price has increased, as you say, substantially, but it's not simply because we see a difference in the energy.
No, but it's your price earnings. Look, I'll tell you where I'm going on this. Yeah. At the end of the day, there are a number of issues because there's a lot of other people who are involved in this whole sort of process. One of them is the shareholders. So you're a publicly listed company or a big company. Your shareholders can be pensioners. It can be in an awful lot of, well, in fact, in probably every case, it's your customers at one level or another. So there are an awful lot of people who are doing this. You also have a requirement to invest into your distribution networks, you invest into your plant machinery, all of that kind of stuff. So what I'm trying to get to is, although it looks like you're storming in huge profits, what I'm concerned about is that your cost of capital is going up because your price-earnings ratio is, as you can tell, I was an investment banker for 17 years, but your cost of capital is going up because there seems to be a whole load of different things which are going on which are causing problems. So one of which is, as you've seen in the last 10 to 20 minutes, you're ferociously unpopular. Everybody hates the energy companies. That's the first one. The second one is you're paying 75% tax. There could be a change in government next year. There could be an 80% tax, an 85% tax, a 90% tax, because there's a perception, obviously, that you're hurting, at the very least, Barry, I'm sure you'd agree. But the important point is your investors now, and as I say, some of you are owned by private equity, some are part of other groups, but your investors are now having uncertain returns on their amount of money. So what I want to know is, what is all of this really ugly argument that's going on doing to your ability to raise capital? Because investors need more than anything else a certain amount of certainty about what's happening in the future. So look, we all want to look after our constituents, but how much more expensive it is? What are you paying on your bond rates, your interest rates on your bank overdraft, and what's happened to the price-earnings ratio at which you can raise capital in the equity market?
I need to come back to the price-earnings ratio. Our interest costs have gone up, but the reality is there has been political risk around energy companies in the UK for a number of years. So we have our credit rating, for example, discussions with the rating agencies specifically mentioned the political risk of being in the UK energy retail market because of the interventions, the price cap, etc. Yeah. Now, having had 3 windfall taxes in the past year, that does further damage investor confidence, because what investors value more than anything is certainty and stability. It's less about the rate of tax that you pay, it's more about the stability. And if you think that the government will continually intervene, then your investors will push you to invest your money elsewhere. So our cost of capital absolutely has gone up. We are, however, committed to the UK, which is why we're constantly trying to make sure that we have a stable regulatory framework, and that we, as we look at the system that we've got just now, we take a whole system approach. We don't simply look at one part of a system that's causing some issues at the moment.
Anyway, so Philippe, I'm going to exclude you from this answer because you are a nationalised company. But for any of the others of you who are,
we still have some issues in terms of financing products.
No, sure, I appreciate that. But you don't have you have a government shareholder as opposed to a private shareholder. So it's slightly more tricky for those. Is anybody finding it easier to raise money?
I mean, I can speak for Sir Energy's experience. We've been impacted disproportionately by the crisis in a negative way because of the structure of the price cap itself. And that
just the crisis is a political discourse as well.
Absolutely, but that is causing the challenge in raising the investment that we would need either to potentially fund ourselves through the crisis and or invest going forward. And that investment would go into better service for customers. It would go into net zero products to help our customers on the journey to net zero over the long term. So the political risk is actually fundamental to all of that long-term vision that we need for an energy transition. We can't be taking one-year looks the whole time. Everything needs to be done with the medium long-term horizon.
Chris, you look like you want to come in, so thank you for that.
I mean, we're listed in, the group is listed in Germany, but we've invested over £670 million in the UK energy system in the last 5 years. The point in terms of the point in terms of uncertainty, does, and a lack of policy certainty does impact us. The one area that I would call out is a lack of policy certainty and a lack of ambition in terms of the investment in energy efficiency in the UK. And the reason that I call that out is because it is an investment in energy efficiency which will bring bills down permanently, which will create thousands of good jobs and will decarbonise. And at the moment, we don't have policy certainty, we don't have enough ambition in the funding levels. If we have that, then that gives us the opportunity to invest alongside government.
And in the submission on that,
yeah,
would be really
absolutely
helpful. And Rachel, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, just to say, I mean, the wholesale market instability that we've had over the last 18 months or so really has increased retail risk. I think we're out of that period. We are incredibly successful in attracting capital into Octopus Energy Group. I think the thing that concerns us actually is that, we now have to tie up much more of that capital into our retail business than before because of new regulations. And indeed, that is actually getting us to the point where we need to make profits in retail, whereas before, as I said, we've been in a position where we can absorb costs and not pass them on to customers. And I think we need to find a better balance between making sure that retailers are financially resilient, which is important, of course, but making sure that that isn't leading to higher prices for customers and less flexibility for retailers in passing on and absorbing costs.
Just to leave on one point, is just to remind ourselves that the people who, if all of you go bust, or any of you go bust, the people that are losing out are pensioners. There could be old age pensioners, there could be people in saving schemes, there could be all that kind of stuff. So shareholders in either your parent companies or your directly are ordinary people on the street. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Look, I want to focus on customer service. Before I do, I just want to pick up on the tax issues that were referred to by my colleague Mr. Garnier and Mr. O'Shea. Of course, before the windfall tax, I think you agree it was that the tax on oil and gas producers in the UK was the lowest in the world at 38% basic. And I'm glad you said that it's continuity and certainty is the important thing, because of course the average globally is 74%. That is before the windfall tax. So if we could even move to the average taxation on oil and gas producers in the world, I think we'd be doing very well. And if you're comfortable with that sort of certainty, I'd be very pleased. Now, very quick answers, because we're short of time. Running down the line, in minutes and seconds, how long do you think it is acceptable to wait before speaking to an advisor in your company?
Since the beginning of this year, we are at 2 minutes, 0.7, and I think that below 3 minutes is acceptable.
3 minutes is acceptable.
Yeah, we're around about 200 seconds. It's also really important that the person on the end of the phone can properly answer the customer's query.
Absolutely. 3 minutes and 20 seconds.
Our average speed of answer is currently, over the last 3 months, is currently 3 minutes. We believe that's an acceptable time for somebody to wait.
Any advance on 3 minutes, Chris?
Ours is higher, but I believe 0 is an acceptable
Higher
time.
by how much?
We're just over 3 minutes, but I believe 0 is an acceptable time. I want the phone answered in the second ring, but we're not there at the moment.
I believe ours is under 3 minutes, at about 2 this year, but 3 is broadly acceptable. You also need to look at other channels, which is what some of the previous panellists mentioned earlier. It's not just phone, it's email, it's also social media. So
do you know that the media members checking this morning, of course? This is going to be a live story.
Mr. Norbury, you'll be aware that when E.ON was fined, I think it was £5 million for the severe weaknesses in your customer service, your wait on hold was running at 18 minutes. So why was that?
At the end of last year, we got it wrong. We didn't anticipate both the volume of calls coming into our contact centres and the duration of those calls. We got that wrong. Since then, we've recruited over 1,000 frontline staff, both into our contact centre operation and our field operations, dealing with customers. This winter, we will spend an additional £5 million recruiting further advisors whose speciality will be dealing with vulnerable customers to help them this winter.
Okay. Another quick fire. There were 6, or there were more, but there were key 6 points that Ofgem has proposed in terms of the reforms to your standard service. One of those was keeping phone lines open for longer during the evenings and at weekends. Have you acted on that, yes or no? And if so, how much longer are your phone lines now open in evenings and weekends? Philippe.
We are not offering a 24-hour, 7 days service.
That's not my question. That was a different point that was made by Ofgem.
Our
question relates to extending hours in the evening and at weekends, as you're asked to do by Ofgem.
We are compliant with what he's asking Ofgem right now.
They've asked you to increase. So what I've asked you is, how have you increased? How have you extended your hours?
We haven't. We had
Rachel.
already.
These are ideas that are under consultation at the moment. We constantly keep our opening hours under review.
You haven't yet. Chris.
I'll have to come back to you with the specific detail on the extension. We keep them under review. We have DigiOps teams available out of hours.
Chris.
So we're just about to go into our annual negotiations with our trade union. We're heavily unionised. We need our trade union's approval, so it's on the list of things to discuss.
Thank you.
They are under consultation, but I would highlight that those suppliers that haven't offered support out of hours have sometimes performed better than others. So it's not, opening hours are not necessarily the only thing that dictate good customer service.
Are Ofgem toothless? I mean, this is an Ofgem request.
Well, these are the proposed series of reforms that Ofgem has requested. So let's move to another one. Now we go to the 24/7 emergency support for customers who are cut off from their power supply during supply issues. Okay, it's only in that case. Have you introduced that?
Yes.
Yes.
No, that's under consultation as well.
Not yet.
Yes.
No, it's under consultation.
Not yet. Okay. Expanded support and more effective support for customers who are struggling with their bills. How have you expanded that support in line with what Ofgem has asked you to do?
We have invested 28,000 hours in training of all our people, and we have specialized a team which is dedicated to help with them, and we have introduced different schemes, as an example, to top up the meter of prepayment customers, to also, with a fresh start, write off the bills of some of our customers, and we have increased by 25% the number of installment plans since the beginning of this year.
Could you put that in writing to the committee clerk?
Sure,
I
can.
We have a tabulation of it.
Definitely.
Rachel.
Yes, already compliant.
Okay, can you say... No, it's not about compliance, because it's expanding that support and enabling more effective support for customers.
We've already addressed that.
You have done that.
Yeah.
Please, again, if you can give the details. Chris.
I think I've already addressed it.
Yeah, you have, indeed.
So we've had an additional 800 agents in the past 12 months, another 800 in the coming 12 months. We're giving them all mental health training. We've increased the financial support we give to customers, the outbound calls. When we see customers through a process we call OSCAR, which is off-supply, customer at risk, so we monitor smart meter data, which is why I feel so passionately that if we can mandate smart meter installation, we can give customers far better service.
Made already, yep.
I think I answered that earlier, but happy to follow up.
Please, if all of you could supply exact details of how you've done what Ofgem asked you to do, that would be very helpful. Finally, how are you making information available on your customer service performance to inform customer choice, which was, again, one of the things that Ofgem asked you to do, going backwards this time? Simon?
At this stage, it's under consultation, and we haven't made any changes.
You're not publicising your customer service standards.
They are Citizen Advice do publish them, and that's the general.
Or not making them available in the way that Ofgem have asked. Okay.
We work with third parties. I need to write to the committee to let you know if we do it ourselves, but we work with third parties like Citizens Advice and other charities.
I'll respond to the committee in writing.
We're very proud of our customer service performance, and indeed we're attracting about 500,000 customers so far this year just on the back of that performance. I think it's really important actually that...
I think we've all heard the adverts, Rachel, about 6 years in a row, and I congratulate you for it. I'm not knocking it, but it's saying making the information available on that performance, not just saying it's best in class. Yep. Are you doing that? How are you expanding that information and making that available?
We're very happy to do that and are very supportive of these reputational measures. We would caution against an overly prescriptive approach from Ofgem. We are concerned that whilst there is bad performance that needs to be improved, there is a risk that over-prescription actually leads to a levelling down. I mean, we have a net promoter score in the energy sector that is 39 basis points higher than the average, and the risk is that over-prescription actually stymies everything that has led to that.
I agree with you. It should become a tick box exercise,
yeah.
And that's a good point taken. Yes, Philippe.
It has been mentioned that Octopus has been number one on the Citizen Advice League table last year for the last quarter. It hasn't been mentioned that EDF was number one for the first 3 quarters of the year. And we are very proud of that. So we are advertising it everywhere where we can, but probably we are not good enough in advertising, I feel.
Okay, it's not about advertising, it's about making service standards
publish it
more available.
Everywhere.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, are you increasing digital support for customers with digital exclusion who don't have internet access? How are you doing that?
I don't know. I need to come back to your question.
Yeah, phones, they can come into the office as well.
I'll need to come back to you.
Use a lot of text messages, yes.
Okay, so please, look, Ofgem have asked you to do this. These are the 6 things they've asked you to do. It was pretty blindingly obvious that we were going to ask you for it today, and yet much of it you haven't been able to provide. That isn't good prep, guys. It really isn't. So, finally, how long does it take you to train a customer service agent? And just how long does it take you to train a customer service agent?
We are actually at the moment changing the platform from the SAP towards the Kraken system. We used to have a 6-week training with SAP, and it's much, much shorter. In fact, myself have been trained in a week.
It never stops. We're constantly training, upgrading the training that our people have, because the needs of customers keep changing, the issues are getting bigger, but also our technology that we're providing and helping those customer service people to support our customers is also evolving.
Basic training at the moment before somebody gets in front of a customer would be how long?
Several weeks, but I'll have to get back to you on the detail.
Basic training for us is 8 to 12 weeks. We have 3 tiers of customer service agent, which enables energy specialists to earn more money as they deepen their skills in serving customers. So that training is continual.
We have 6 weeks, what we call Granby, when they start before they get on customer service. Then they have continual training.
6 weeks for standard for customer care, where the crisis has changed things is we need more support for vulnerable and more support for those customers in debt, and that takes a lot longer, and it's a different type of expertise that we are having to
Thank you very much.
require.
Thank you. Just quickly following on from Barry there, I noticed that Ofgem ask you to do things. I mean, how seriously do your companies take that? Ofgem ask you to expand the opening hours. Nobody's done it. I mean, at Ofgem, what do you think of Ofgem? Toothless?
I mean, this year we've seen Ofgem take more proactive action on customer standards than before with energy suppliers, with the compliance.
If you don't do these things that Ofgem want you to do, like expanding hours, what can Ofgem do to you?
Follow the enforcement process, but ultimately it ends up in fines and potentially worse.
So do you think if you don't expand your hours that Ofgem will be fining you? When do they ask you to expand your hours?
That is under consultation with that framework, and once that framework goes into the licence conditions, then there'll be obviously scoring against it, and if suppliers are failing against the standards that Ofgem have set, then that's when the enforcement action and compliance action would take place.
Well, Ofgem being a bit slow in making sure that this happens, but where's the responsibility for the expansion of hours not happening?
I mean, that is an Ofgem, that's the regulatory framework that Ofgem are looking afterwards, but aside that, call waiting times and broad customer standards, they are catered for under the licence conditions as they stand, and if those aren't being upheld, then Ofgem have a responsibility to enforce against suppliers.
Okay, thank you. I noticed that the tax rate, it wasn't the tax rate, but the tax stability, you said, Mr. Shea, was important. So presumably you could live with the 74% global average that Mr. Gardner was talking about, as opposed to the 38% easy ticket you've got from the UK government.
I think Mr. Gardner's been slightly mischievous in that the UK North Sea Basin is very mature, and we've had a number of government interventions which has chased investment away. And we now find that we produce 1/4 today of the oil that we did in 1999 at the peak.
But if the tax rate went up and stayed stably up, you'd be happy enough.
I think that because if you take a country that is awash with oil and gas, it can almost set its own tax rate because people want to be there. The UK needs to compete for investment. I think that we've had so many changes that I think that
development in the North Sea Basin is now subsidised by the public 91 pence in the pound. You know that as well as I do.
I'm not here to debate about oil and gas. I just think it's important that we get the facts right, that there is obviously a tax deduction. So the higher the tax rate the government imposes, the higher the tax deduction. That's the way a tax system would work. My point is that the UK, my early career was as a tax advisor in oil and gas. So I've done a lot of this across the globe. I did a lot of it in the UK. The UK basin, we might all regret this, but it doesn't simply have the attractiveness of other oil and gas basins. So if you have a very, very high tax rate, you're unlikely to attract the investment that
We've got the lowest tax rate in the world, and we have the highest subsidy. In fact, at one point, as you well know, it's a 130% tax deductible that was put in place by the now Prime Minister when he was Chancellor, which would have meant that if we had exploited the Cambo oil field, it wouldn't have been Shell and Sycar that were forking out to pay for it. It would have been the British taxpayer paying 100% of those development costs and giving them a 30% bonus on top. I don't think that that's in line with what you were talking about.
Briefly, do you recognise that? And then I have to move on.
No, again, I think the facts are incorrect. I don't know about the Cambo oil field, but the Norwegian tax rate deduction for capital investments is 93%. So, I mean, I'm happy to have a separate debate with you offline about it, but I just think it's important we have the right facts.
Maybe you can have a separate offline debate publicly, it would be useful. Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
Thank you very much. So do you think it's acceptable just to meet, Simon, you've mentioned this, you've said a few times, just in that answer you were giving earlier on, Ofgem are setting the standards, it's in consultation, when those standards are met, of course you will all meet it. So is the aim to just meet the bar that Ofgem set, or is there an aim to innovate, to be better?
So Energy started in 2015. I think top the citizen advice rankings more than any other supplier. We're not number one today, but that's certainly our aspiration. Part of the problem, I think, you need to look at incentives within the market itself. We're meant to be a market, but the market's not functioning right now. The price cap is the de facto price. Suppliers have little incentive, perhaps, to compete because customers aren't switching. And if they were able to choose with their feet, then maybe actually suppliers have a stronger incentive to move to switch to improve their standards and use it as a selling point. Right now, we have a price cap framework that's pretty much setting the price for the whole sector. Customers aren't moving, and the market's not working as it should do.
Okay. So it's all the market's fault and none of your fault. How many warm home discounts did you provide last year?
I believe it was just above 20,000, but that is...
What percentage of that of your customers?
So the way the warm home discount is calculated is it depends on our customers linked to the DWP database, and then we provide an uplift depending on if that's disproportionately less or more depending on the supplier. So we as a supplier have disproportionately fewer eligible customers, but then we make up that with a top-up payment in April the year afterwards. So every supplier essentially pays the same amount on a percentage basis across the whole industry.
Okay. So, but the percentage of your customers, what is the percentage of your customers that get the warm home discount?
I think it's probably about 5, 6, 7% in that region.
7%. Chris, how many warm home discounts did you provide over the last year?
630,094.6 million pounds.
And that's £140 for eligible customers.
Yeah.
Do you think that we even touch the sides?
I think for those customers that are most in need, I think it's insufficient. I feel very strongly that help should be targeted at those customers that need it most. It should not be blanket help, whether it's the warm homes discount, whether it's the energy price guarantee, whether it's the energy bill support scheme, whatever it is, those that need the most help should get most help.
The warm home discount is focused on people who need it. It's a means tested process.
Yes.
So you're saying that you think that should be higher?
The point is that if you have other help that you're giving to everybody, that's money that you could otherwise put into things like the warm home discount. I think that
Did you put money into other schemes?
We put £100 million in, £50 million last year, another £50 million this year, and we'll put more in the second half of the year. That's voluntary, over and above any licence requirements.
If I was a customer of yours, getting the warm home discount, what else would I get?
Depends on your level of need.
In need, and I'm in need.
So a customer, the average payment that we made to customers in need was about £1,000. So debt relief, we put credit on, we've given £7.4 million to prepayment customers, putting automatic credit on. I think on average they've had £100, but it depends on the level of need, it depends on the level of debt, it depends on the help that we need. Where we've had customers that have had debt through prepayment meters, we tend to have a 5-year repayment, so they tend to pay back at about £5 a month. So what we try and do is to really help our customers.
Thank you. Chris? Miss Norbury, sorry. No.
We've already written to government with proposals on a social tariff, which could be developed from the basis of the warm homes discount. The total amount of funding could be
in favour of a social tariff?
Absolutely, we'd be absolutely in favour of a social tariff. There is only so much that we can do ourselves, albeit the things that I've mentioned earlier.
Would you there's a proposal, kind of an energy for all proposal, that you give us fixed amount almost for free for customers, and then a much higher amount you charge after that. Would you be in favour of those kinds of proposals as well?
We would be in favour of targeted support for those people who need it most through a social tariff. We've written to government explaining how we see that could work based on the warm homes discount, increasing the funding from £150 per customer to £300 per customer, increasing eligibility from 3 million households to 8 million households.
What's the response from government?
The promised consultation, you heard that earlier.
And why can't you do that now, yourself?
I described earlier what we will be doing this winter ourselves. But
you know the people who are on the warm home discount, because that data is shared. Yeah. So why can't you do what you're suggesting now?
I described what we will be doing this winter. Which is for very low income families, we will be offering a rebate on the energy bill. For low-income families who have medical care at home, we will be offering a rebate on the energy bill. The rebate for those is 25%. Where customers already have energy debt with us, we will be bringing in who fit into those categories. We will be bringing their account back to zero, and we will be offering a 50% rebate on the energy bill. That is for the 6 months of this winter. That is what we can do for our customers.
And so you have effectively, what are you saying to me, that you have implemented a social tariff through the back door?
We will be implementing something that goes towards a social tariff, yes, but we are limited in what we can do on our own. It would be far better and far more beneficial for people across society if that intervention was made by government.
Rachel?
We need both. Energy suppliers need to continue doing what they're doing and do more of it. We provide standing charge holidays, for example, for our customers in need, as well as the credits and so on.
On standing charge, is that an Ofgem required charge?
Standing charge is, but it's up to the supplier. It's a cap, a ceiling, not a target, we would say, and we choose. All of our customers actually have lower standing charges than the cap. But then, of course, we can also provide
So the supplier
customers...
could decide to get rid of the standing charge and offer zero standing charge and put it all on the
They
bill.
would not be able to do that under the Ofgem
Why would they not
rules.
be able to do that? If it's a maximum rather than a minimum.
Because there's also a cap on the unit rate. So I think there would be a challenge with doing that unilaterally. I think that is something...
You could do that, but you'd lose out a lot of money.
It would probably be more than we could afford, but it's the kind of thing we would love to explore with Ofgem as an idea. But we desperately need government support. The warm home discount goes to too few customers and is too small. That's the bottom line.
You could increase it. Are you doing the same as what Chris is doing?
We are doing very, very similar things to what's been said already in terms of writing off debt, standing charge holidays, etc.
What would be useful is if you all could write outlining from a customer point of view. I'm not interested in you've spent X billion pounds on that's irrelevant. From a poor customer point of view, someone that needs support, what do they get individually in their account? I know I meant to hand over to the chair, but I wonder if all of you heard in the previous panel some of the advice centres and people saying that they would like a dedicated phone line to them. Is that something that you will agree to go away and set up? You have given dedicated phone lines to us as MPs almost entirely. Could you open those phone lines up to them?
We do some of that at the moment, but the thing we have discussed this with some of the organisations here today. The thing we have to be careful of is if that dedicated phone line results in a quicker result for customers, then what we'll do is increase the pressure on the charities.
More people can come into my office, and I'm sure more people in need going to those advice centres is, in the end, a positive thing because they can look at them holistically. But if they want it, will you agree to do it?
We have already a line which is dedicated to Citizen Advice Plymouth.
We're in the same position.
You have already, Chris?
We'll work with the charities.
You'll work with them, and Chris, you'll work with them?
Yeah, it needs to be consistent and such that it doesn't make the problems worse.
So 2 have it, 3 hopefully we'll get there. Thank you.
We'll go back to charities in a few months and see how that is happening. Alexander Stafford, you've been very patient. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I know we're pushed a bit for time. I'd like to refer more now to non-domestic customers and mentioning small businesses. So opening question really is, what are you all doing to make it easier for small businesses to, I'm not going to say thrive, but survive, when according to the FSB, 96% of all SMEs are reporting concerns about costs of energy, with 68% of accommodation, hospitality reporting extremely worried about cost of energy, and 45% of retail. What are you doing to allay those fears?
We put £15 million of our support fund specifically for small businesses. We also started offering this year something we call blend and extend, which is so small businesses that fix the prices at the peak of the market were really struggling. Now, we offered those fixed prices because we were encouraged to, because there were no fixed price deals in the market late last year. We didn't think it was the right thing. We were asked to provide them. We did provide them. Companies now that are struggling with that, now when we sell a fixed price contract, we buy that gas or electricity on the market, so we've bought at that higher price. But what we allowed them to do is to extend by 1 year or 2 years and actually blend this higher price in, so they get a lower price right now, but they pay slightly more in years 2 and years 3 to allow them to manage their cash flow better.
We don't actually supply to business customers, so probably best to use the time.
Okay, anyone else want to?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to add, we never sell through brokers. And we actually see brokers as being one of the things that rack up costs for businesses. They're often pocketing higher prices that are not needed for the business to pay in the first place. So we also are doing the blend and extend that British Gas talked about, and making sure that we're in a position to provide bespoke support for our business customers that are struggling to pay.
In EDF, we are reaching out at 150,000 customers that have signed in 22, and we have offered to reopen 15,000 contracts. We are in discussion with brokers, as Rachel has mentioned, in order to reopen 15 over 1,000 contracts, but we need the approval from the broker, so that's a negotiation which is going on.
We also offer a virtually identical blend and extend tariff to that, which has already been mentioned.
Okay, my understanding is Octopus, the company here, that uses time of use tariffs for businesses. Is that something the rest of you will be thinking about and really, to help businesses?
We also have time of use tariffs.
You have time of use, okay.
Yes.
When it comes to minimising credit risk for businesses in current energy jobs, what else other support are you guys doing for that?
It's difficult. I mean, I'm not sure that we as a supplier can minimise credit risk for customers. What we do is we monitor quite closely to see our customers paying for what they're using. And if they're not, we try and engage with them early. We find that for any debt management, whether it's for residential customers, business customers, early engagement is really important, which is why we try to proactively contact them, because when people start to get in debt, they tend to clam up. So we invest a lot of time and a lot of money in trying to make sure that we don't let things get out of hand.
Anyone else on that?
Yeah, early engagement, also making sure that what they owe is very, very clear to them in the communications that we send.
Amongst other things that we can do, obviously, is offering an installment plan, as we do for our residential customers, but also rolling out smart meters is part of the solutions that we are offering.
Just want to go back quickly, I think, Chris, what you said about the blend and extend tariffs. Nationwide have put some evidence forward that they are should be 11% more expensive for those businesses. So is that a form of profiteering for you? You think you look like you're helping, but actually you're making more money in the long term?
I mean, I would say our small business supply business has grown quite substantially this year, so I think we must be doing something right. We want to give the customers what they want. If we offer a fixed price contract today, we'll buy that gas or electricity in the market, whether you want 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. You probably can't buy much further forward than 3 years. And we'll reflect what the market price is at that point. And we'll reflect what competitors are doing as well. So, no, it's not a form of profiteering, but you also have to accept that if you think about a blend and extend contract, if we have something, to simplify it, that costs us £100 today and something that would cost us £50 tomorrow, and we offer the company that we think is in financial distress that they pay £75 today, not £100, and they pay £75 tomorrow, we're taking on more credit risk rather than the company. Because if that company's in distress, which tends to be some of the companies that take blend and extend, we take a risk that we're going to take a loss in year one, which we otherwise wouldn't take, in the hope that we'll make a profit in year two. So there is an increase in credit risk, but no, it's not profiteering, it's a service for customers.
I appreciate you're taking a wider risk yourself, but if a company's already struggling a bit and needs it, and then in the sort of medium term, you're putting another 11% basically on their charges, you're not actually doing them much of a favour, are you? You're saving them for a few months or year, but in the sort of the medium term, are you really helping?
Sorry, I don't recognise your 11%. That's my point, which is we offer the price that we see in the market today, so I don't recognise that number.
Thank you, and thanks for following the time. Mark Garney.
Rachel, perhaps I could address you. Really, sort of the purpose of my question is to sort of see what the government can do more in order to try to sort of stop passing on shocks. Back in the last winter, there's a lot of criticism was that energy prices rise like a rocket and fall like a feather. Is there anything the government can do to stop these price shocks being passed straight through you guys and onto the consumer?
Well, I mean, I think firstly, the price cap that is in place actually helped to slow down those price shocks getting passed on to customers. So that is, one of the many reasons we're in support of the continued use of price protection for all customers, to make sure that all customers get fair prices.
Well, to be fair, there's a criticism about the price cap now being a price target.
Yes, that's not how we treat it, and I think we'll perhaps see more companies coming in and thinking about how they price under the price cap. But I mean, I think the price cap certainly smoothed those price shocks. I think for customers, ultimately the best solution is to move faster to get off gas and coal, and to move faster to have a decarbonised energy system where we're not subject to price shocks from international energy markets. So we would really like to see, coming out of the lessons of the last few years, a redoubling of efforts to speed up connections for renewables, to make more use of consumer demand side flex, to really move a lot faster than we have been doing to get to net zero.
In a funny sort of way, though, you're absolutely right. I mean, the price shock is driven by the fact that we don't have secure oil and gas supplies, and you're absolutely right. We need to find alternative ways of doing that. But in the interim, you've just created a very good argument of why we should open Rosalind and Cambo.
Well, I think there's perhaps a subject for another select committee hearing with respect, but there's question whether if we'd had more of our own gas reserves, we would have still been subject to international price pressures. I think we would have.
So I appreciate that, but you're right. It's a global price, and so you're going to be paying on a global price basis. Chris, I think you're looking like you want to come in. Or maybe you're not. Actually, well, there's two Chris's. Sorry.
For us, there's two things that government can do more. We've touched on one, targeted support by means of a social tariff to help people this winter. Two, a significantly scaled up investment in energy efficiency. If I go back to pre-2012, we were at times insulating 2 million homes in the UK per year. That's completely fallen off a cliff since then, and it is through investment in energy efficiency that we will cut bills permanently and we will decarbonise. And that is something that government can start now, and that is something that means that we won't be sitting here this time next year having the same conversation about an energy crisis.
You want to come in?
So we have three asks. One is we're vastly undergunned on gas storage. We need far more gas storage. So I would ask the government to really seriously consider that.
There are interconnectors with the European gas storage based on the European Union, aren't there?
There are, but we've got 12 days gas storage in the UK. In France, we've got 120. In the Netherlands, they've got 109. In Germany, they've got 90. So we operate the UK's largest gas storage facility, so we've got a dog in this fight. But we commissioned a report that said that energy bills would have been £2.4 billion lower over the previous winter had we had Rough operating at just under its full capacity. That would have been £88 for every single house in the UK. So that's the first ask. Right. The second ask is we ask Ofgem to move faster and farther on financial resilience. We saw 30 energy companies go bust. That cost consumers over £2.5 billion. The poorest in society are paying £88 a year. That's why their standing charges have gone up. So the capital adequacy requirements brought in by Ofgem are not high enough, and they don't come quickly enough because companies are far too undercapitalised. And the third one is a transparent retail market. Abolish the standing charge and have one single electricity price and one single gas price for the entire UK. Get rid of regional variations, get rid of the standing charge, because it hits the poorest hardest.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I think Angus is going to...
Yeah, thank you. Just a point that occurs to me, that if we do have more renewables or whatever, if prices are still denominated in gas, it isn't going to change very much, because, if there's a farmer's market and everything was denominated or sold at the price of the highest lamb or calf, the farmers would all universally be very happy, despite the various quality of the various actual price that they are getting. A final point I want to ask is to EDF, and you've probably got a foot in both camps. I presume you're from France, the company's French. Are you seeing the same? Because we're preparing for winter here in this inquiry. We talked earlier about 4,706 excess deaths, and that's a 47% increase on the previous year, and I should correct what I said to the first panel. But are you seeing this sort of dysfunctionality, this hammering of people who can ill afford things happening in France as it is happening in the UK?
That France has introduced very early a social tariff, which enables to target the help to the customers that are struggling the most. It has also introduced a register which is shared across all utilities, which is governmental-led, in order to identify the vulnerabilities and to avoid interventions, at homes of customers that are vulnerable. And I would hugely recommend indeed that such kind of register be built, because it would be useful not only for ourselves, but also for all the utilities. I think also in France, the government has hugely granted money in order to reduce the bills of the customers. As you are very well aware, in fact, the bills levels haven't risen at the same pace than in the UK. The price have been kept with a 4% increase last year at the cost of the taxpayer, and they have increased during this summer by 15%. I'm speaking just about electricity, which is what EDF is generating.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Maybe last one point,
yeah,
but smart meters in France has been mandatory, so it's rolled out in nearly all houses without any form of issue, and it's providing obviously a better grip on customers' consumption. I think it's a very useful tool. We saw ourselves that the customers that are using their smart meters, are making savings. So I really urge to look at that and to question, in fact, the way the rollout of the smart meters are done in the UK.
It seems, from what you've said, less dysfunctional for poorer customers in France than the UK. That would be roughly correct. I don't want to put you in too much of a spot. I'll make a political conclusion from you. Panel, can I thank you all very much for coming today and for answering questions, first and second panel. But thank you very much to Philippe, to Rachel, to Chris O'Shea this time, and to Simon Oscoff as well. Thank you all very much. Much appreciated. Order.